The first number spoken in a negotiation almost always wins. Not because it's fair, not because it's accurate, because your brain physically cannot ignore it once it's out there, in the room. This is called anchoring bias. And once you understand the mechanism behind it, you'll start seeing it everywhere, especially in your own salary negotiations. To understand why it's so hard to resist, it helps to know a little about how the mind actually processes a number like that. Judgment doesn't happen the way most people imagine, as a slow, careful weighing of evidence from scratch every time. Most of it happens fast, automatically, running on shortcuts built for speed rather than accuracy. A number that lands in front of you gets grabbed by that fast system immediately, before the slower, more deliberate part of your thinking even has a chance to evaluate whether the number deserves any weight at all. By the time careful reasoning shows up to the meeting, the anchor already has a seat at the table. Behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky proved this decades ago, and the setup was almost embarrassingly simple. They gave people a random number, generated in front of them, and then asked an unrelated estimation question. People who saw a high random number guessed higher on the follow-up question. People who saw a low random number guessed lower. Same question. Wildly different answers. The only thing that changed was a number that had nothing to do with the actual answer. Sit with how strange that is for a second. These weren't uninformed guesses pulled from nowhere. People were doing real mental estimation. And yet an irrelevant number, one they knew was essentially random, still dragged their answer toward it. That's the core of anchoring bias. It doesn't require the anchor to be relevant. It doesn't even require you to believe the anchor is meaningful. Your mind uses it as a starting point anyway, and then adjusts from there, usually not adjusting far enough. That last part is worth underlining, because it's the actual mechanism, not just the symptom. Kahneman and Tversky called the pattern anchor and adjust. People rarely ignore a starting number entirely, and they rarely accept it outright either. Instead, they nudge away from it, a little at a time, until the answer feels roughly right. The problem is that this nudging almost always stops too early, leaving the final answer stranded much closer to the original anchor than it should be. It's less like being pulled by a rope, and more like being handed the wrong map. You still walk your own path from there. You just walk it from the wrong starting coordinates, and never travel quite far enough to correct for it. This matters because it explains why anchoring survives, even when people are actively trying to be careful. Adjusting from a number feels like due diligence. It feels responsible, like you're doing the work of questioning the figure in front of you instead of just accepting it. But adjusting is not the same thing as recalculating from zero. Every adjustment still starts from the anchor, still carries its gravity, still treats the anchor as the reasonable center, even while appearing to question it. The process looks like scrutiny from the inside. From the outside, it's still captivity to the first number, just captivity that took a few extra steps to arrive at the same place. Now bring that mechanism into a salary negotiation. A manager throws out a low ball number first. Maybe it's genuinely how much budget they have. Maybe it's a tactic. Either way, that number is now sitting in the room. The candidate's counteroffer doesn't start from their actual market value anymore. It starts creeping up from the number the manager just said. The anchor becomes the new center of gravity for the entire conversation, even though it was never actually tied to what the job, or the candidate, is worth. Think of it like gravity around a heavy object. Drop any number into the room, and every subsequent number bends slightly toward it, the same way a marble rolled near a bowling ball curves toward the bowling ball instead of traveling in a straight line. The candidate doesn't consciously decide to orbit the manager's lowball figure. It just happens, quietly, underneath the negotiation, while both sides believe their reasoning independently. Picture the candidate's actual internal experience for a moment. They walk in with a rough number in mind, something loosely based on what they think they're worth. The manager opens with a figure well below that. Almost instantly, without meaning to, the candidate's internal sense of what's reasonable shifts downward too. Their counteroffer, the one that feels bold and assertive in the moment, is often still lower than what they would have asked for if they'd never heard the manager's number at all. They walk out feeling like they negotiated. They just negotiated inside a frame someone else built for them. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Even skilled, Experienced negotiators anchor without noticing it happening. This isn't a mistake made only by nervous first-time job seekers who don't know any better. Kahneman and Tversky's research, and the long line of studies that followed it, found that people with real expertise in a domain are still pulled by anchors inside that exact domain. One striking example of this involves real estate agents, people whose entire job is accurately pricing property. Researchers showed agents a listing with an inflated price attached to it. The agents still valued the house higher than they otherwise would have. And here's the detail that matters most. Even when the agents were told, directly, that the price was fake, made up for the study, it still pulled their valuation upward. Knowing about anchoring, knowing the number in front of them was meaningless, didn't protect them from its effect. That single detail tells you something important about how anchoring actually works. It isn't a knowledge gap. It isn't something you can fix just by reading an article about behavioral economics and thinking, okay, now I'm immune. The bias operates below the level of conscious reasoning. It happens in the gap between seeing a number and forming a judgment, a gap that closes faster than deliberate thought can intervene. It behaves a lot like a well-known optical illusion, the kind where two lines are actually the same length, but one looks longer because of arrows drawn at their ends. Even after someone measures the lines in front of you and proves they're identical, the longer-looking one still looks longer the next time you glance at it. Your eyes don't stop seeing the illusion just because your brain now knows the truth. Anchoring works the same way inside judgment instead of vision. Knowing the trick is real doesn't turn it off. The number still looks meaningful, even after you've been told, in plain language, that it isn't. That's what makes anchoring genuinely dangerous for smart people specifically. Someone who has never heard of the concept, at least, has the excuse of not knowing better. Someone who has read about it, studied it, maybe even taught it to other people, can still walk into a room and get anchored exactly the same way, because the bias was never a matter of intelligence to begin with. It's a feature of how perception works, not a gap in anyone's knowledge. This should change how you think about every negotiation you've ever walked away from feeling confident about. Confidence in the moment isn't proof you weren't anchored. It's often the opposite. The whole trick of anchoring is that it doesn't feel like being manipulated. It feels like reasoning. You feel like you carefully considered the number and landed somewhere sensible, when in reality, the sensible feeling range itself had already been quietly narrowed by whatever number you heard first. The confidence and the bias aren't in tension with each other. The bias is often exactly what produces the confidence, which is precisely why so few people ever catch it happening to them in real time. But here's the part nobody expects, and it's the part that turns this from an interesting psychology fact into something you can actually use. Anchoring isn't just something that happens to you by accident. Companies deploy it on purpose, deliberately, as a structural tool. Some job postings show a wide salary range specifically so that candidates anchor near the bottom of it. A range like that isn't sloppy transparency. It's often carefully designed. The company knows most candidates will treat the low end as a realistic starting point and negotiate cautiously upward from there, instead of anchoring on the number they actually deserve. Vendors do the same thing with pricing. A vendor quotes an inflated list price first, not because they expect you to pay it, but because it resets your internal sense of what's reasonable. When the real, discounted price comes in below that inflated anchor, it feels like a win. It feels like you got a deal. But the comparison itself was manufactured. The first number was never a fair starting point. It was a tool to make the second number feel generous by contrast. This doesn't stay confined to salary talks and vendor invoices either. As a manager, you run into anchoring constantly on the other side of the table, in places you might not even label as a negotiation. Asking your own boss for more headcount. Asking finance for a bigger budget for next quarter. Pitching a raise for someone on your team to the people above you. Every one of those conversations has a first number, and whoever says it first is quietly setting the frame for everything that follows, the same way the manager and the candidate do in a salary talk. If you walk into a budget conversation without your own number ready, you're not negotiating. You're reacting to whatever number finance opens with, and adjusting from there instead of from what your team actually needs. Once you see this pattern, you start noticing it everywhere outside of salary talks too. Retail prices with the crossed-out original number next to the sale price. The first house a real estate agent shows you, priced high, before showing you the one they actually want to sell you. The opening bid in any negotiation, from a used car lot to a corporate acquisition, someone, somewhere, is usually choosing the first number on purpose because they know what it will do to everyone who hears it next. Even the structure of a menu uses this. A restaurant that puts one extravagantly priced dish at the top of the menu isn't necessarily expecting many people to order it. That dish exists to reset everyone's sense of what counts as a normal price. So the second most expensive item, the one the restaurant actually wants you to order, suddenly looks reasonable by comparison. Nobody sat you down and explained the anchor. It did its work silently, before you'd even decided what you were hungry for. So if knowledge alone doesn't protect you, what actually does? This is where the fix gets practical, and it's simpler than it sounds, even if it isn't easy. The fix isn't willpower. You cannot outthink anchoring in the moment it happens, because by the time you're consciously aware of the number, it's already done its work on your judgment. Trying to mentally resist an anchor after hearing it is a losing strategy, because the damage happens faster than deliberate reasoning can catch up. The fix is preparation, done before you ever walk into the room. Research market rates for your role, your experience level, your location, before the conversation starts. Decide on your number in advance, based on that research, not based on gut feeling in the moment. Write it down. Having a number already fixed in your mind gives you your own anchor to work from, one that's actually grounded in reality, instead of whatever the other side happens to say first. Part of that preparation should also include knowing your actual walkaway point, the number below which the deal genuinely stops being worth it to you. Negotiators sometimes call this your best alternative, the option you'd take instead if this particular deal fell through entirely. Without that number clear in your head, an anchor doesn't just distort what you counter with. It distorts what you're willing to accept as final, because you have no independent floor to compare it against. With it, you have two fixed points of your own, your target and your walkaway line, and neither one moves just because the other side spoke first. If you can, state your number first. This flips the entire dynamic. Instead of reacting to someone else's anchor, you become the anchor. The other side now has to counter from your number, adjusting off of it the same way you would have adjusted off of theirs. This is the single biggest reframe most people miss about negotiating. It isn't a contest of who can hold out longer or push harder. It's a contest of who gets to define the starting point, because the starting point quietly decides the range everything else falls into. Speaking first isn't rude, and it isn't aggressive. It's structural. It's choosing to be the gravity in the room instead of the marble pulled towards someone else's. If they get there first and anchor low before you can speak, don't make the common mistake of countering near their number. That's exactly what anchoring bias is counting on you to do, nudging your counteroffer up from their low starting point instead of resetting the conversation entirely. Instead, restart the conversation from your own researched figure. State it plainly. Explain the reasoning behind it, the research, the market data, the experience that justifies it. You're not obligated to negotiate from their starting line just because they spoke first. None of this means throwing out an absurd, wildly inflated number just to plant an aggressive anchor of your own. That approach can backfire, because a number with no credible reasoning behind it tends to damage trust and stall a conversation instead of shifting it. The goal isn't to out-anchor the other side with a bigger, more dishonest number. It's to anchor with a number you can actually defend, one backed by real research, so it holds up under questioning, instead of collapsing the moment someone asks you to justify it. Here's the piece of this that I think gets missed in most explanations of anchoring bias, and it's worth saying directly. The reason this bias is so effective isn't really about numbers at all. It's about who gets to define the frame of the conversation before either side has said a single word about actual value. Whoever sets the first number isn't just picking a starting point, they're quietly deciding what the entire negotiation is going to be about, and by the time the other side realizes it, they're already arguing on someone else's terms. That's why preparation matters so much more than cleverness in the moment. You can't out-negotiate an anchor with a clever comeback once it's already landed. You can only prevent it from landing in the first place by walking in with your own number ready before anyone else gets to speak. Anchoring is powerful precisely because it happens fast, before conscious reasoning kicks in. You can't outthink it in the moment. You can only outprepare it long before you ever sit down at the table. That's really the whole lesson compressed into one line. The negotiation isn't won or lost in the room. It's won or lost in the research you did or didn't do before you ever walked in. The manager who sets the first number in a negotiation usually keeps the advantage for the entire rest of the conversation, even when the other side is smart, experienced, and knows exactly what anchoring is. Make sure that manager is you. Do the research beforehand. Know your number cold. And when the moment comes to speak first, speak first. The first number spoken in a negotiation almost always wins, and now you know exactly why. Not because it's fair, and not because whoever says it is smarter or more skilled at the back and forth that follows. Because the human brain, yours included, latches onto whatever number arrives first, and quietly builds the rest of the conversation around it, whether either side ever notices the process happening or not. If this changed how you're going to walk into your next negotiation, hit that follow button, because the next case study, like this one, is already in the works.